Aloha, and thank you all for joining us for our weekly Hanauma Talk seminar series. My name is Gavin Y, and I am the Outreach Program Coordinator for the Education Program. This is co-sponsored by the City of County of Honolulu and the Hawaii Sea Grant Hanauma Bay Education Program. Tonight's talk is on food for thought, security, sustainability, and equity. And we are partnering with the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. My contact info is on the screen. If ever you need to contact me about any questions you guys may have after the seminar ends and you want to get in contact with the speakers, please feel free to contact me at the phone number or the email. And if you guys want to check out other past seminars we've had in the past, you guys can check out our Hanauma Talks YouTube channel. They're all there for your viewing. So the background on the Hanauma Bay Hanauma Talk series is that the Hanauma Bay Education Program partners with organizations across Hawaii to showcase educational talks with leading researchers, environmental leaders, natural resource managers, and cultural practitioners. It usually runs about an hour at a time, and it's a 45-minute presentation time with a 15-minute question and answer session at the end. A few friendly reminders, please keep all your questions till the end of the presentation, or feel free to type in the chat box at any time, and we will address it during the 15-minute question and answer period. Also, please turn off your microphone and video function during the presentations. We appreciate it. Now, a little background on the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, who we've been covering for the past month. Their mission is to support the City and County of Honolulu in its vision of a more economically self-sufficient and safer Oahu by building a resilient island community in the face of challenge and change. And they've actually covered a bunch of parts of these areas as part of their climate strategy. And he's actually the second speaker. We'll have Dexter Kishida, who is the Food Security and Sustainability Program Manager. Speaking first, we have Mia Farinas, and she is the Food Systems Policy Analyst serving as an AmeriCorps VISTA with the Office of Climate Change and Sustainability and Resiliency. And with that, I'm going to leave it to me. Dexter, if you want to put up your screen.
And then would you mind bringing it to the first slide of the presentation? There we go. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to share with you all the work that we've been doing to strengthen our food system within the City and County of Honolulu. I just wanted to get us all started by giving you a short history on the background of the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. So just to start off, in November 2016, Oahu voters decisively approved a city charter amendment for the creation of the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And they established this Resilience Office to tackle climate change head on, and that's through actions such as reducing climate change emissions and impacts, promoting resilient communities, and ensuring sustainable city plans and policies. And the next slide. So I want to start by defining this term resiliency, and that's basically the capacity of individuals, communities, institutions, and businesses and systems to survive, adapt, and thrive no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. So those chronic stresses can look like long-term coastal erosion, whereas an acute shock would be something more like a hurricane or a tsunami. And then just introducing the Oahu Resilience Strategy. So Ola in Hawaiian means well-being, living, thriving, and healthy, but it also connotates salvation, healing, and survival. So the Oahu Resilience Strategy describes basically a clear vision for a thriving island community that's even in the face of challenge and change. And when all of us reclaim a shared responsibility for island resilience, we can look forward to Ola Loa, what Mary Kavena Pukui defined as the state of being completely cured and recovered. So this resilience strategy was written by our community, and that was over an 18-month period where grassroots residents and community leaders helped shape and craft 44 resilience actions. And that was through an agenda setting workshop where the office brought together 140 plus stakeholders from 19 sectors representing 117 orgs to create this document. And the outreach process included all 33 neighborhood boards, so there was a huge focus on community input. And they also conducted a resilience perception survey. And one of those questions they ask, how resilient do you think Oahu is today? And of the 2,200 respondents, the average answer was a 3.9. So that kind of gives us a baseline of how people think we're doing. Sorry, could you go one slide back? And then I just want to go over Bill 65, which is now Ordinance 2047. And this establishes a vigorous city standards for climate change and sustainability. So under Ordinance 2047, the city will transition to 100% renewable energy fleet by 2035 and achieve carbon neutral economy for Oahu by 2045. So really excited to see the city really taking these goals seriously and putting them into our future plans. So Ordinance 2047 also codifies and clearly defines the roles and outcomes expected of the Resilience Office. And this includes having programs focused on energy, coastal and water, climate resilience and equity, food security and sustainability, zero waste, and pre-disaster multi-hazard mitigation program. It also defines a process for Honolulu to adopt the newly released Climate Action Plan and establishes a collaborative One Water approach to climate change adaptation, as well as establishing a benchmarking policy to track energy and water usage in city-operated buildings and facilities. So that brings us to the main focus for our team and for this presentation today, and that's looking at food security. So I just want to quickly define that. And food security is a state of having reliable access to sufficient quantities of affordable and nutritious food. So that means being able to access food at all times, and that's during rain or shine, and for all people on island, regardless of location or income. So because we live on one of the most isolated places on Earth, our local food system on Oahu plays a really big role in our food security. Currently, we're only producing 15% of what we eat, and that's really scary considering how isolated we are as an island. So for our program, we want to increase local food capability, but we aren't shooting for 100% food self-sufficiency, and that's because we want to eat, other kinds of foods that don't grow here, like wheat for bread, and also because it's really important for resiliency to have redundancies in our feeding capabilities. We do want to see increases in local food production, especially in foods that we're able to grow here. So our current goal that we're looking at is increasing local food in our diet from 15 to 30% by 2030. And a major hurdle that we have to this currently is our lack of data and measurements. It's really difficult to see what growth needs to be done without having good data to create a baseline and see how we're growing. And then just describing our overall food system. This is really important because local food security is not just found in our food production on island. It's also made possible by creating ways to support local food throughout our food system. So for example, that's creating strength in our food processing capabilities, whether that's through appropriate slaughter infrastructure for our local meat or food hubs. And then also looking at how we distribute our food, making sure that there's infrastructure that can serve different sizes of farms, not just big farms, and that local food is reaching our community and not just restaurants or hotels. So when we talk about gaps in our overall food system, COVID-19 revealed some major vulnerabilities that we have throughout our food system. So at the very start of the pandemic, we saw unexpected supply chain disruptions and hoarding, which left our grocery stores empty. And we all remember that. So with our current lack of strong local food supply and reserves, we saw just how close we are to having no food in the event of another disaster, such as a hurricane or tsunami, where our food supplies would get cut off. And then on the community side, as businesses closed and people were left without work, we saw hundreds of thousands of people in food lines. And among these people, there actually were our farmers who are struggling to sell their produce when restaurants and hotels who they typically sell to shut down. So it's not just issues with growing our food, but also getting our local food to local people. So I think this really brings us back to the issue of resiliency in our food system, and that's asking ourselves, how can we create a resilient food system that can survive, adapt, and thrive no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience? So looking at agriculture, all of this is great ag land that's pictured, but it's also susceptible to changes in climate, whether that's from warming on the west side or like in Waimanalo, there's torrential downpours in that area. So it's not out of the question to think about needing to adapt to our food system in the near future, whether that's through crop changes or new growing methods. Um, and then just looking at our feeding capability, also seeing how we currently rely on emergency food stores and distribution centers that are mainly in one part of the island that is a flood zone. So it's really important to address these vulnerabilities in our food system.
And during the pandemic, we really saw the impacts when thousands and thousands of people were lined up in these feeding lines um, because of the economic shocks. So not only are we worried about the climate shocks that are happening already, but things like a pandemic and the very strong possibility of increased chances of future pandemics due to the way the climate is changing, and the way that we raise and do food in these large scale food production sites, um, that we need to build. And as Mia and I started in the city, realized quickly that we need to create these programs and procedures to mitigate these hazards or these risks. And that's what leads us to the this really important conversation, I guess, that is it programs that we need to create, or is it policy? And sometimes they clash. I really hope that the programs that we create inform future policy, that the programs that we're doing, be it farm to car or farm to food or fish to dish, et cetera, will inform future policy by creating case studies or pilot projects that can better determine up and downstream unintentional consequences that usually happen when policy is created blindly. Because we do need to change policy. There are things that we need to do both in the city and in the state. In the past, quite honestly, the city took a view that ag and food production was more of a state issue, right? Department of Health views or does the regulations for food producers, meaning like restaurants and things like that. And Department of Ag would govern agriculture, so both state offices. But the city and county of Honolulu has really made a stance to say that we need to help out as well, that our farmers and food producers need assistance to get better, to do better what they do, to be more efficient, to have the resources that's necessary to succeed in a world that's very um, heavy on rules and litigation. So one of the programs that we're creating also is a small business resource network for many of our farmers. 95% of our farms would be considered really small businesses, actually. And so having the small business resource network will provide the tools of grant writing or um, or other financial possibilities, uh, be it loans or equity, that we can lead farmers to see how to best capitalize their operation. But not only financing, because that's not that, while that does help a lot, that's not everything. The other pieces are legal assistance, that as they form from a sole proprietorship to an LLC, can they get access to legal assistance? And through all of this, and we'll touch on this again, is a piece on equity, that many of our farmers are um, English is their second language, and they need assistance to even access some of the resources that are available, like during CARES 1.0, and the Small Business Relief and Recovery Fund was available for farmers as well. But with English as their second language, many of the farmers didn't access those kinds of that kind of assistance that was available to them. But through all of the really sad and dark things happening in agriculture and food production through that really were exacerbated through the pandemic, there's a lot of good that's coming, and there's a really bright horizon that I think is forming in Hawaii. And Hawaii is being built, or is really primed to be the best case study in the world on how to create food sustainability amongst an island state. And it really starts with working together and understanding the current paradigm. Currently, Hawaii Institute for Public Health is doing a food systems mapping endeavor. And so it looks almost like a pumpkin with spots, somebody told me, or a bowl of spaghetti with meatballs, either way. But they're mapping the food system to see what levers there are that we can work on to really change and impact the food system for the positive. That we know what's been happening in the current food system, or what led us to today, where we're relying 85% of what we eat on a boat or a plane that's coming here, or that in the case of an emergency, that we may be eating, according to a talk done by Haima's administrator, we may be eating ketchup and M&Ms because of the short food supply that we have on island and the limited production that's happening. So we know what got us here, but now we need to find the correct levers to push, because of the limited amount of funding, to change that and redo this food systems map. The other positive piece is all of the networks that are forming around food and agriculture. One of the really key levers that the city and county is looking at are the food hubs that are popping up. During the pandemic, they had exponential growth. And food hubs are places that are micro aggregation sites that are regionally located. So they support the local farmers in the area. Many of them run CSAs, or consumer supported ag, where you get like a bag or a box of produce. But they also provide the perfect opportunity to aggregate for larger buyers like institutions, hotels, grocery stores. So where one farmer couldn't produce enough, a typical 5-acre farm on Hawaii couldn't produce enough to fulfill the needs of your local supermarket, the aggregation site like a food hub can. And the excess can be further aggregated through the usual produce suppliers to fulfill folks like University of Hawaii, like the school system, are as perfect examples of larger buyers. And this hub and spoke is a great model and an efficient model to leverage the amount of small farms that we have to fulfill the great needs that Oahu also has. And as I said on the equity focus, it's really to raise the whole ship of food and ag. It's going to take looking at every piece and every one. And a lot of our farmers, as I said, we have a large contingent of Southeast Asian farmers and Pacific Islander farmers. And some of the assistance that we can provide them is just translation services to help them access current programs and opportunities that are out there for them. But there are also a large number of native Hawaiian farmers that are on a list for DHHL, Department of Hawaiian Homelands, to access ag lands. So it's also providing our host culture the resources that is available for them to become farmers as well. So it's looking at the people and the place and matching them together. Because really, while land is expensive in Hawaii, or especially on Oahu, it is available. And so can the land set aside for Hawaiian homelands be quickly processed to get these farmers on there? Of course, in the news lately, the Agribusiness Development Corp has been in the news a lot. How do we get farmers quickly onto the lands that are available and ready for them to start farming on to increase food production? Because all this leads to a diversification of our economy and a strengthening of our economy. Really, diversification leads to resiliency. And so if we cannot just rely on tourism, then we'll have a stronger economy. And agriculture is a huge viable option for us to invest in. As well as there's one thing that all 1 million people on Oahu do every day. We all eat. If we can change even 10% more of what we eat to eating something that's grown here, it'll make a huge impact into the economy of Hawaii by job creation and increased revenue at the farm gate. The other piece to it all is farmers are we're coaching farmers to diversify their markets as well. That instead of just putting all of your eggs in one proverbial basket, it's mixing it up a little bit. And food hubs help to do that. Because a 5-acre farm may not be able to have enough produce to do a CSA and go to a supermarket and provide to a restaurant. But participating in a co-op or a food hub does provide that opportunity for that farm to diversify what they're selling to who they're selling. So heaven forbid another pandemic happen and restaurants close or hotels close, there are other opportunities for them to sell their produce to other venues. And on top of all that is leveraging tourism. Tourists will be here in some capacity in the future. So authentic ag experiences is actually the desire for authentic agriculture experiences is on the rise for tourists. And so why not create those opportunities as well to tour a farm, have a meal, stop at the gift shop, and increase your revenue that way as well. So not only looking at growing the food here, but further processing, because there's the added benefit of drying your spices that you're growing to lengthen shelf life, or creating jams, jellies, or other products that can be stabilized for a longer shelf life. Because as we work towards a greater diversity of farms and a greater diversity of products that are being created, the other goal is to then work on exports and even getting outside money then coming into Hawaii. So whether it be momaki tea, jams and jellies, or fruit leathers or juices, that Hawaii's brand is really strong worldwide. And so let's leverage that for the agricultural sector as well. But all this comes down to an increase in food production. That the projection is that we'll have 2 million pounds of breadfruit in the next 5 years. That's a lot of breadfruit. I'm not sure how many of you actually eat it on a regular basis, but 2 million pounds will significantly, or could significantly, replace potatoes that we do ship in very regularly. Or we could mill it, dry it and mill it into flour to cut into the wheat flour that's currently being used. Or there's been projects to make an ulu milk as a plant-based alternative to be utilized. So while You could eat it just as is or put it into your stew or curry and replacing a potato. There's a lot of other innovations that are happening to utilize agricultural products today, but it's also figuring out ways to grow them, whether it's looking at other trials on plant spacing in the changing climate, or building hoop houses and using aquaculture to grow our lettuce to get a more vibrant, robust, and juicy lettuce leaf that lasts a bit longer on the grocery shelf and stays crisp, to going back to sugarcane and making rum out of it, um, it- like Kunia does at Kohana Rum. So looking at food production doesn't just have to be what it was in the plantation era. It doesn't have to be what it was in the last 5 years. I'm really excited in all of the developments that are happening, from urban farming and indoors. Looking at Japan and Singapore has a lot of that, and we have a few facilities on Oahu that are starting that, to using aquaponics, almost a mini ahupua'a system, from raising fish to growing edible food in it, to native Hawaiian crops like kalo and ulu that are starting to increase in usage, and in very modern ways like ulu milk. Which leads to food security, because it's not going to be just one thing that solves our food security issues. And one big one is storage space. Much of our storage is based in flood inundation area, and so that presents many problems. But moving some of the storage into the field also extends the amount of food that we have available for our population and for our people. So moving, and as well as diversity of place. So ensuring that production still is happening on the Waianae coast, still happening in Waimanalo or Kahalu to the South Shore, is really, really important. And as well as continuing to grow diversity, that from our keiki to kupuna, from birth, or what I've heard, from 3 to 103, we need to ensure that we can have a food supply ready. And that means increasing what we do, and helping us all understand that buying local is important, but that also means us making it affordable and accessible to everyone. So what kinds of things, what kind of assistance can we provide our farmers to make them price comparable to what we're importing from these 300 or 600 acre farms on the continent? Local pork is a perfect example. This year, it made it into local grocery stores, and that's great. But it's also a higher price right now because we need to import feed. We need to import quite a lot to support the pork industry currently. And one thing that would help is a processing facility. So the city's looking at how we can support a small animal processing facility to do um, to do things much more efficiently than is currently being done. And so between creating a food secure Oahu, as well as a sustainable one, so not only being able to eat today, but eating tomorrow, our office is looking at creating programs and policy to strengthen the food system here. Um, and with that, would love to entertain any questions.
So the question period is
Got
open.
it. So Marsha got that. Hope someone will discuss the recent Civil Beat article about DOE. Right. I came from, so my prior position to joining the city and county was with the Department of Education. I was the farm to school coordinator. And so specifically trying to increase, and we had great pilot projects while I was there in Kohala, Mililani, as well as Kauai. since leaving, uh, it was also in the midst of the pandemic. They've made a few steps back, but the potential is huge. Spending around 40 million on food every year, even 10% of that could make a huge impact in for our growers here. Tack on not only Department of Education, but the prisons and the state-run hospitals. We're talking about 60, 70 million dollars worth of food that's being bought statewide. So let's say we increase that to a 30%, then we're putting quite a significant amount of dollars into the food economy without having to do grants, loans, et cetera, that are state funded. What makes it a little challenging at the same time are some procurement rules. At the legislature this year, there were a few things to try and help the state departments get through that. But from my understanding, many of them may have died during crossover and may not be continuing. So I have to try again next year. But one issue for the Department of Education is the small purchase threshold. They can only spend up to 25,000 without doing a formal solicitation. And so doing formal solicitations require the farmers or aggregators to formally respond in writing, locking in a certain dollar amount. That seems quite challenging when it comes to something volatile like produce. UH system helping with any of these suggested initiatives. Go Farm is a huge partner and someone that we're really we are supporting. And so they're definitely helping on the food producer or the grower end. We also do partner with a few folks at UH Manoa on their dietetics college, as well as their CTAR, oh my goodness, it's totally escaping me what they're called, but the food scientist side, to work with them on figuring out what else they could do with food. KCC also has an amazing food scientist that in their innovation center that also is working to do a few of these projects. So yes, are we working with UH? Most definitely, as well as sometimes the county is just really, our major role is making these connections from farmer to state entity like UH or KCC if they have a product that they need. One example of a product that was being developed at KCC and what to do with the inside of the pineapple, the very center core, and they were making candies and some other items out of that. Like to hear more about initiatives to promote hydroponic vertical farms like they're doing on Lanai. There's a few indoor projects that are on the verge of spinning up. One of the issues, of course, is initial capital for those kinds of endeavors. So usually it takes someone with quite a bit of capital to have a building, be able to put things like PV, photovoltaics, water systems, as well as all the necessary grow beds. So the initial capital is a bit much, but once you get there, the production is increased. So definitely hydroponic vertical farms also help on the resiliency end because it's indoors. So we're not worried about the torrential rains nor heat that's happening. Any live bills in the legislature that you should support, please let us know. Mia, if you can think of any that are still alive, go ahead and put them in the chat. Many of our bills are either pretty close to dead or have died. As with the truncated ledge session, it just seems that some really good legislation is not even being decked to be heard, even though it was heard initially on crossover, it hasn't been. So what are we doing regarding the what do you regard as a low-hanging fruit of solutions that are workable but not happening now? Gleaning is one thing that Kauai is doing that I've been really interested in. Many of our farmers plow under the seconds or the off-grade produce. It's just not worth them picking it because there's really no market for it, or they don't want to lower the price of their high grade by selling the off-grade. But a gleaning program would help to make food accessible to more communities as well, because ugly fruit tastes just as great. It just looks a little off, or that cucumber is just a little too crooked, but it tastes just as fine. So gleaning programs are definitely low hanging, but not really happening yet. And there are some issues like liability and just cost of manpower. But Kauai has actually formed a bunch of folks that's kind of the SWAT team that goes out voluntarily to help glean fruit and take it to the Kauai Food Bank. So and for a nonprofit CSA. But that would be one thing that I could see happening, as well as was mentioned earlier, the state institutions being a huge buyer in Hawaii, DOE being the largest restaurant chain, or said by some, would be amazing. And there is some things that they can be doing now, and in fact, there's a lot that they can be doing now. But it's going to take programmatic will, or the Department of Education's will, or the will of the legislature to mandate it. There may be a bill alive still, and I'll put, or Mia, can you put my email in the chat, and feel free to email me and I can check to see if it's still alive. But there was a bill to mandate a 30% local purchasing buy from state institutions, but I'm not 100% sure if it died. It might have turned into a reso, actually. There are a number of pieces which need to move forward for all of this to happen, where's the emphasis or starting point? Land, labor laws. I used to say land and water were the most important pieces because we needed to make land available and water available. Actually, those are quite available. We just need to put people on them. That's one thing. But what we're seeing is more upstream than the actual grower. Creating value add facilities where farmers can increase the value of their crop is one thing that we really see as key place, as well as the aggregation site. So that food hub, and really, really helping the food hubs flourish, is another piece that we see as the starting point. And from that, there will be some policies that we want to adjust as well. That would be another area that I guess the next tier that we would want to work on. And yes, am I thinking of Lauren Tamamoto? Last name is totally escaping me, but if that's, I think that's the Lauren at KCC. And yes, the food hubs, so are those food hubs expanding or getting developed? Yes, they are. And they've also started to group together as a hui to be able to network when one doesn't have enough to pull from somewhere else. So one example is during the first CARES Act, we put $6 million out into the community to respond to the pandemic for food insecurity. And so we funded a bunch of the major food distributions from Waianae Coast Comprehensive, Kokua Kalihi Valley, in Waimanalo, Ke Nui o Waimanalo, and quite a few others. And these community-based groups, really, the only rule was you had to buy from Oahu first, and then from the rest of the state second, and that's it. Putting the 6 million definitely tapped the local farmers because of the short time frame, and it was like 2 or 2 months that they had to spend this, and that's what formed these food hubs, also reaching to neighbor islands to help support. So because of the size of our city and county, we definitely need the neighbor islands to help backfill at times, especially now, until we can develop a bit more farmers and a bit more farming. Workforce, going back to the prior question, is also another thing that we need. Go Farm's doing great job at creating future farmers and farm businesses, but we also just need a bunch of farm workers. And that's another area that we're hoping to continue to develop, is through, I know, workforce development, like was mentioned, having folks get the opportunity to work on farms and try it out. It's definitely not for everybody, but the hope is that we will capture some that realize that maybe working closer to home, working on the land, is something that they want to try out, and as a future career. So the goal is to, I'm sorry, regarding food hubs. So the goal is to support the food hubs that are in existence and identify the communities that we need to actually form future food hubs. I definitely see Waimanalo as an area that there isn't a strong food hub presence in the area yet. So working with either current farmers that have some aggregation capacity, or another organization that could become that aggregation capacity. And this network, the network of food hubs, will really help stabilize local food accessibility island-wide.
Are there any other questions? Feel free to tap in the chat. At about 10 minutes. Those are great questions. Well, with that, if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to contact me and I'll get in touch, or contact Dexter. He put his email in the chat room. Want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, and hope you guys can make it for next week's talk. We are switching the partnership. We will be covering the Hawaii Audubon Society, and so the talk will be by Susan Scott, and every kolea counts. That's what it will be called. So hope you guys can make it for that talk next week. Once again, I want to thank Dexter and Mia for taking time out and sharing their important information, and hope you guys all learned a lot.
Thank you.
Good night and have a great weekend.